How did it happen with you two? I exclaimed as I walked in from work, only to find my husband and son sprawled on the living room floor. What's wrong? I rushed to their side, panic rising in my chest. They were both in the midst of a seizure, struggling to breathe. Without hesitation, I dialed for paramedics, and they were swiftly transported for treatment. As we rushed to the hospital, I was bombarded with questions, but all I could offer were fragmented observations. I was as clueless as anyone about what had caused this sudden collapse. In the hospital, as the doctors tended to them, I was ushered into a separate room, heart pounding with dread. "Are they okay?" I asked, desperation lacing my voice. "They'll be fine," the doctor assured me, especially Ben. The gravity of the situation hit me like a ton of bricks. My strength seemed to evaporate at the doctor's words. From that moment, I was thrust into a whirlwind of uncertainty. My name is Laura, and for the past 5 years, I've been married to Mark, living with our son Ben. I met Mark during my days as a post office clerk. He frequented the office to send out his handmade items for sale on a flea market app. What began as mere clerical exchanges gradually evolved into conversations, and soon I learned his name. After one routine transaction, Mark left me a piece of paper, hastily scrawled with his phone number. I hesitated, unsure of what to do. Eventually, curiosity won over, and I dialed the number. "Hello?" His voice on the other end was a mix of surprise and anticipation. "Is this Laura?" he asked. "Yes, it's me. Did you give me your number?" I couldn't help but chuckle. I had been jittery before making the call, but somehow those nerves dissipated as soon as we began talking. Before I knew it, an hour had flown by, and Mark casually asked me out on a date for the following week. "Next week sounds perfect," I replied, feeling a surge of excitement. "I'm looking forward to it." And so our dates became a regular occurrence. With each outing, we grew closer, our connection deepening organically. It wasn't long before our companionship blossomed into something more meaningful. There were no grand declarations of love, just a gradual understanding between us. When I was 26 and Mark was 28, he proposed. My response was an enthusiastic yes. I envisioned a blissful married life ahead of us, but reality had other plans. "I'm glad your parents were so welcoming," Mark remarked as we walked towards my childhood home. "I hope mine will be too." "I'm not so sure about that," I admitted, "but let's hope for the best." As we entered, my parents greeted us warmly, offering their congratulations. It was a heartwarming moment until my sister, Mia, appeared. "Did you forget to tell Mr. Mark about me?" she teased, catching me off guard. "I'm sorry, I should have explained," I stammered, feeling a pang of guilt for not preparing Mark. Once the confusion was cleared up, pleasantries were exchanged, but little did I know, this encounter would unravel into a nightmare. Afterwards, my sister and I discussed the situation. Our relationship had never been particularly close, especially after I left home to support our ailing mother. I had sacrificed my education fund for her medical expenses, a decision she couldn't comprehend. I harbored no regrets about the choice I made. Sacrificing my education fund for my mother was a decision I stand by. However, Mia didn't take kindly to it. That moment became a turning point in our relationship. Despite having walked similar paths until then, from that juncture, we drifted apart. Our communication dwindled, and we seldom kept in touch, even during occasional visits home. We made a point to avoid each other as much as possible. That dynamic remained unchanged, yet strangely, she seemed genuinely pleased about my marriage. "I thought this might break the ice," I remarked, attempting to lighten the tension. "That's nice. I wish I could find someone like Mark," Mia responded. She mused wistfully. "I'm sure you'll meet someone wonderful," I reassured her, but her response caught me off guard. "Actually, I think he may have already appeared," she hinted with an enigmatic smile that lingered in my mind. And so, our married life began. With the arrival of our son, We reached the pinnacle of happiness. However, as time passed, subtle changes crept into our lives. Mark started coming home unusually late and began venturing out more frequently, even on holidays. Then tragedy struck. Upon returning from work one day, I found both my husband and son lying unconscious in the living room. Panic surged through me as I rushed to their side, calling for help. Paramedics arrived swiftly, whisking them away for treatment. "What happened?" I asked frantically as they were taken to the hospital. "I don't know," I confessed, my mind reeling with fear and confusion. At the hospital, after hours of agonizing wait, the doctor finally called me aside. "Are they okay?" I asked, bracing myself for the worst. "They're stable now," the doctor assured me, "but they've suffered from acute nicotine pesticide poisoning." Relief flooded through me, but it was short-lived as the gravity of the situation sank in. Caught in a whirlwind of emotions, I found myself grappling with an unexpected turn of events. "I'm sorry," I mumbled, struggling to process the ordeal. I was taken aback by the diagnosis. "What is acute nicotine pesticide poisoning?" I inquired, my voice trembling with worry. "It's a poisoning caused by ingesting an ingredient found in pesticides," the doctor explained. Symptoms include dizziness, convulsions, and difficulty breathing. Dread gripped me as I absorbed the severity of the situation. The doctors bombarded me with questions, probing for any clues about what could have caused it, but I was at a loss. I couldn't even recall what they had eaten before I arrived home. They were admitted to the hospital for further examination, but the next day brought a new wave of distress. Police officers arrived at our home. "What's going on?" I demanded, my heart racing with anxiety. "This case appears to be more than just an accident," one officer stated. "We'll be investigating it as a potential crime." "Can you tell us exactly how you found them?" Their scrutinizing gazes made me uneasy. It was clear they harbored suspicions, though I couldn't fathom why. Nevertheless, I cooperated with their inquiries, hoping to dispel any doubts. During the search, an officer discovered pesticides in our trash can. "I don't know anything about this," I protested, genuine confusion clouding my mind. "I don't remember buying it." Despite my protests, I was escorted to the police station for further questioning. I reasoned that fleeing would only deepen their suspicions. At the station, they took my fingerprints, which were later matched to those found on the pesticide container. I was detained pending the results. Anxiety gnawed at me as I awaited the outcome. When the results came back, the officer's words struck me like a blow. "Your fingerprints match those on the pesticide," he declared. "You're now a suspect in an attempted murder case." I was stunned. How could this be? I couldn't comprehend why my fingerprints were on the pesticide, let alone why I would harm my own family. As I sat in the interrogation room, my mind raced with confusion and fear. The interrogation stretched on, each question digging deeper into my actions on that fateful day. It started like any other day. I began, my voice trembling. I went to work at the post office as usual. After my usual lunch at a nearby cafe, which lasted about an hour, I returned home. I recounted to the officer. He seemed satisfied, but then he asked about the day before. That afternoon, I went to a nearby supermarket and bought a cake. I explained. After that, I went straight home. The officer then presented me with a laptop. "Take a look at this," he said, showing me a video clip from a surveillance camera at a store. In the footage, a woman stood in front of a shelf stocked with pesticides. "Is that not you in the video?" the officer inquired. My heart skipped a beat as I scrutinized the screen. "What is this? Wait, it's me," I gasped, but then realization dawned on me. "No, wait, this is not me." The officers exchanged incredulous glances. "Are you sure?" one asked cautiously. I pointed to the screen, noticing a detail. "Look here," I urged, indicating a mole near the woman's mouth. "I don't have a mole. This isn't me. It's my twin sister, Mia." The revelation stunned even the police. "Your twin sister," they echoed in disbelief. As they reviewed the evidence, they found footage of me at the supermarket, wearing the same clothes as the woman in the video. However, no one outside my family would know if I had left the house dressed like that. It all makes sense now, I murmured, realization dawning on me. Concern flooded me as I realized the implications. What has happened to my husband? I inquired anxiously. If he's out of the hospital and back home, please check on him immediately. I believe he's been seeing my sister. The officer looked taken aback. How can you be so sure? Taking a deep breath, I explained, because they're having an affair. They're trying to frame me. But your husband is a victim too, isn't he? That way, suspicion would be diverted. The gravity of the situation seemed to dawn on the police. We'll need to investigate further, the officer conceded. I understand, I replied, but please check on both of them. It'll reveal everything. I understood that I was being detained. Typically, I would have been arrested immediately, but they decided to hold off, recognizing the significance of my testimony. It felt like I was hanging on by a thread. 2 days later, I was summoned back to the interrogation room. As you suspected, we looked into your husband and found evidence of an affair, the officer informed me. We spoke to him, and he confessed to everything. I'm sorry about this, the officer continued. It was our oversight. For the time being, I was exonerated, but the ordeal was far from over. The betrayal by Mark and Mia cut deep, especially considering they had implicated my young son. I knew I had to confront Mark. You've done a despicable thing, I told him, struggling to contain my anger. I can't believe you involved Ben in this to frame me. Mia must have been behind this. Indeed, it turned out that Mia had orchestrated the entire scheme. She had suggested using pesticides to frame me as a murderer. Mark, under her influence, had bought the pesticide and laced the cake with it while I was away at work, just as I had come to visit him. So, where is Mia? I demanded. I don't know, Mark confessed. I couldn't reach her before the police took me. She must have run away. You'll pay for your crimes, I warned him. You're not getting away with this. As expected, Mia had disappeared, but the police eventually found her hiding at a man's home whom she had met through a dating service. She was taken to the police station, where she confessed to everything. I rushed to the station to confront her. Mia, why did you do this to me? Because I've never liked you since you left, she spat back. Then she revealed her resentment, explaining how she had felt inferior to me for sacrificing my education for our family's sake. Despite the pain and betrayal, I couldn't help but feel a pang of pity for my sister. Her negative feelings towards me had festered over time, culminating in incidents like this one. Was that why you approached Mark? I asked, struggling to comprehend her motives. I just thought that if I slept with your husband, you would despair, she confessed coldly. When he came to greet me at the wedding, I knew I could manipulate him. In other words, she didn't choose Mark for who he was. She chose him because he was my husband. He said he was going to be with you when I was gone. That stupid man had a crush on me. I just made it easy for me to take advantage of him, she continued, devoid of remorse. I can't forgive Mark, but still, he was just being used by her. Despite the betrayal, I couldn't help but feel a sense of pity for Mark. Why'd you target Ben? I demanded, struggling to contain my anger. Of course, it's because he's your son, she retorted callously, confirming my suspicions. Well, whatever the reason, what you did is unforgivable. You'll pay for it for the rest of your life, I vowed, my voice trembling with anger. With those words, she was taken away. The trial of Mark and Mia commenced. My husband was accused of framing me for attempted murder and faced numerous charges. In the end, he was sentenced to prison, including the payment of alimony. Mia, too, faced trial, and despite her confession, she would serve her sentence. However, even if they atoned for their crimes, the scars of their actions would linger. They would forever be labeled as ex-convicts. Meanwhile, my parents offered to move in with us. Would you and Ben like to come live with us? My mother proposed. I think your mom would be happy if you did. Though hesitant at first, I accepted her offer for my mother's sake, who was exhausted from the ordeal. With my mother's recovery and Ben's cheerful presence, our new life together began. From now on, the four of us would reside in a new house, finding happiness together. Months had passed since the trials of Mark and Mia concluded, but the emotional scars were still fresh. Although justice had been served, the betrayal I experienced left deep wounds that weren't easy to heal. Ben, though young, had sensed the tension, and his once bright smiles had dimmed in the aftermath of the ordeal. Living with my parents had provided some stability, but it was clear that both Ben and I needed time to recover from everything that had transpired. I knew that healing wasn't just about moving forward physically, it was about finding peace within myself. One day, as I sat on the porch watching Ben play with his toys, my mother joined me. She handed me a cup of tea, her eyes soft with understanding. "How are you holding up?" she asked quietly, her gaze following Ben as he ran around the yard. "I'm trying, Mom," I sighed. "But it's hard. Every time I look at Ben, I think about how close I came to losing him, how Mark and Mia almost destroyed our lives." She placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. "Healing takes time. You've been through so much, but you're strong, Laura. And you've got Ben. You're his rock now. He needs you more than ever." Tears welled up in my eyes. I just don't know how to explain all of this to him. He's too young to understand. "He doesn't need to understand everything right now," my mother replied softly. "But he needs to see you happy, see you rebuilding. That will give him the security he craves." Her words stayed with me long after that conversation. I knew I had to create a new foundation for Ben and me, one that wasn't tainted by the shadows of the past. But how could I find that peace when the betrayal still haunted my every thought? One afternoon, while organizing some old boxes, I came across a family photo from before everything fell apart. It was a picture of Mark, Ben, and me, taken during one of our happier times. I stared at it for a long moment before feeling a surge of anger. This man had once been my partner, someone I trusted with my life, and yet he had betrayed me in the worst possible way. In a fit of frustration, I almost ripped the photo apart, but then I stopped myself. Tearing apart memories wouldn't erase the pain, nor would it help me heal. What I needed was acceptance. Mark's betrayal was part of my past, but it didn't define my future. The photo reminded me of one important truth: I had survived. As time passed, I slowly began to rebuild my life. I enrolled Ben in a new school, hoping the change would give him a fresh start as well. I also started looking for a new job. Working at the post office felt like a reminder of the life I used to have, so I began exploring other options, something that would bring me joy, something that would allow me to focus on my future. During this time, I found comfort in small, everyday moments, like cooking dinner with my mother or watching my father play with Ben. These simple acts grounded me, reminding me that life, despite its challenges, still had beauty in it. One evening, as I tucked Ben into bed, he looked up at me with his innocent eyes. "Mommy, why don't we see Daddy anymore?" he asked, his voice soft and curious. My heart clenched. I had been dreading this question, unsure of how to respond in a way that wouldn't hurt him. "Ben," I began gently, sitting down on the edge of his bed. "Daddy made some bad choices, and because of that, he can't be with us right now. But that doesn't change how much I love you or how much Grandma and Grandpa love you." He looked thoughtful for a moment, then nodded. "Okay, but you'll always be here, right?" I smiled, brushing a hand through his soft hair. "Always." As Ben drifted off to sleep, I realized that while I couldn't control everything that had happened, I could control how I moved forward. For Ben's sake, and for mine, I needed to keep going. In the months that followed, I made strides in reclaiming my independence. I found a job as an office administrator at a local nonprofit, a place where I could focus on helping others while slowly rebuilding my own sense of purpose. The work was rewarding, and I found solace in knowing that I was making a positive impact on the community around me. But the biggest step in my healing came one day when I received a letter from Mark. It had been nearly a year since the trial, and this was the first time he had reached out to me. I hesitated to open it, unsure of whether I was ready to hear from him. But curiosity got the better of me, and with trembling hands, I unfolded the paper. In the letter, Mark apologized for everything: his betrayal, his actions, and the harm he had caused to both Ben and me. He admitted his guilt and expressed regret for the choices he had made. But he also asked for forgiveness, not to excuse his actions, but to give both of us a chance to move on. I stared at the letter for a long time, feeling a whirlwind of emotions. Forgiveness wasn't something that came easily, and I wasn't sure if I was ready to offer it. But as I sat there, reflecting on everything that had happened, I realized that forgiving Mark wasn't about absolving him of his mistakes. It was about freeing myself from the anger and pain that had weighed me down for so long. That night, I wrote back to him. My letter wasn't filled with forgiveness, but with the acknowledgement that we both needed to move on. I wished him well, but made it clear that our lives had diverged. Ben and I were creating a new path, one that no longer included the shadows of the past. As the weeks turned into months, I noticed a change in myself. The pain that had once consumed me began to fade, replaced by a quiet strength. I had survived the worst and come out on the other side. And as I watched Ben grow and thrive, I knew that we were both healing, slowly but surely. Our new life was far from perfect, but it was ours, and in the end, that was all that mattered.